Yeah, you guys are gonna love both guys in New York. Starting with Joe Schoen, he was pretty much Brandon Beane's right hand man for quite a few years here. He came over 2017. I don't think Trubisky would go to the Giants unless they literally tell him he could compete for the starting job. I think Trubisky's going to have a market.
I think he could compete for the starting job here. The Giants are the ones who sent Joe Schoen in the middle seat on the back row of an airplane next to the bathroom. The Pagulas have a private jet, so I can't imagine they're going to get outbid, but I guess it's possible.
All right, thanks for tuning in to the OFN Today as we talk a little bit of New York Giants football and a little bit of Buffalo Bills football, because everything that's transpired over the last week for the New York Giants has to do with the Buffalo Bills, because not only did the Giants hire their new general manager and Joe Schoen, 42-year-old Joe Schoen, the assistant general manager for the Buffalo Bills the last 5 years under Brandon Beane. But then, not surprisingly, the Giants went out and hired Brian Daboll, who was the offensive coordinator the last 4 years for the Buffalo Bills, with, of course, Schoen in the front office at the same time. So Ryan Talbot, nyupstate.com, of course, joining us to talk Buffalo Bills football. Thanks for doing this, Ryan.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be on, guys.
And Ryan Dunleavy, of course, here to talk Giants football whenever we have something to talk about. And this is as good as it gets for New York Giant fans, because the regular season hasn't been kind, but the draft and free agency, okay, especially the draft when you have a losing team. But now it's even the stakes are a lot higher, Mr. Dunleavy, because the organization has now hired not only a new GM but a new head coach. So there's a lot of changes that's going to take place with that roster in the coming years.
The only thing different between the Giants and the Bills right now is a lot of wins. So, that's the only difference.
And Josh
right?
Allen.
And Josh.
Yeah. And a great defense and a good offensive line. Yeah. Otherwise, and Sean McDermott and Leslie Frazier. But yeah, otherwise everything's the same.
Sure. Yeah.
No, I would tell you, I was just at Joe Schoen's intro press conference last week. I was at Brian Daboll's this morning. These intro press conferences, the Giants are kings of them. I mean, they've had 4 intro head coach press conferences since 2016. They've had 2 GMs intro press conferences since then. They always spark a day of optimism. And certainly I would tell you, optimism was high today as Brian Daboll was cracking joke, just guy comfortable in his own skin. And you could just say, okay, you could see where these guys are the guys you would want in charge. Ryan, you know them better than I do. I've known them each for a week or a day. What's your impression of both guys?
Yeah, you guys are going to love both guys in New York. Starting with Joe Schoen, he was pretty much Brandon Beane's right-hand man for quite a few years here. He came over 2017. He's been with the team for quite some time. Obviously was with the Dolphins for some time. Really smart guy, was out on the road with Brandon Beane a lot, knows his stuff. It's a loss for the front office. Now the Bills are loaded even at front office. Brandon Beane does a really good job of loading up on people that he trusts, that he thinks are great minds. But Joe Schoen definitely had his hand in a lot of these draft picks, a lot of those players that you currently see on this roster. Next time you guys get Joe Schoen, though, ask him if Kim Pagula is going to send any treats or anything on draft night, because that was always the running gag. They'd have the videos a few days after the draft, and Joe Schoen would always be just like pigging out on Kim Pagula treats and desserts. So that's probably going to be the one thing that he absolutely misses about leaving Buffalo more than anything else. But I think maybe having some really high draft picks to tinker around with will help with that loss. And then Brian Daboll, you're right. A guy that's comfortable in his own skin, real people person, willing to answer just about any question that you could think of on those Mondays after a game. Great offensive mind, and not just from his time in Buffalo in the last 2 years with the success he's had with Josh Allen, but this is someone that spent many years with Belichick in New England, Nick Saban at Alabama. So, he's learned from the best of the best. I really do think the Giants hit a home run on both of those hires.
The big thing, buzzword we keep hearing now is alignment, right? You got to have alignment. And the Giants didn't have alignment. And I got a story, actually. Maybe you know it. Maybe it's well known in Buffalo. Maybe you don't. And I'll give you your listeners a little tidbit. I thought we asked for an example of alignment. And Joe Schoen told us that whatever draft Gabe Davis was in, was the 1920. What was that?
Oh, this was the second year. So, yeah. Yep.
Okay. So, Dabel said, I need this. A receiver who can play all four positions, a guy who can stretch the field. I need this player. And he went to the scouts, told them that. They 4th round came up. Okay, Gabe Davis, check this box, check this box, check this box. Draft him, 4 touchdowns against the Chiefs in the AFC Championship. So I thought that was a really neat example of alignment's a buzzword. Well, here's how it gets put into action. A coach tells you exactly what he's looking for. The scouts know what the coach wants. Boom, boom, boom. And that sounds easy, but I know for a fact that's not how it worked with the Giants the last few years with Dave Gettleman. Certainly not with him. Probably not with Jerry Reese the last few years. And that's how you have a lot of draft picks who end up as busts like the Giants have had.
Yeah, and listen, I know there's a video out there of Gabriel Davis specifically, and if you can find it and share with the Giants faithful, I think they'll really enjoy it. It was at the scouting combine, and it's Brandon Beane, Joe Schoen sitting up in their box, and they're literally having a conversation saying, man, I hope he doesn't run as fast as we know he can go, because they said, we love this guy. We want to make sure he's there on that 4th round because they had done their due diligence. And then, Gabriel Davis, he was clearly a guy they did their homework on. They interviewed him in the pre-draft process. They kind of razzed him a little bit when they talked about his inspirations. He was talking about Larry Fitzgerald, and he name dropped him just by Larry at first, and like, oh, you're on a first name basis with this guy, just joking with him a little bit. And you could see the personality come out. But that's just it. They have an idea of what they want. They get together, they talk, they watch these guys. And the first thing Gabriel Davis did after getting drafted was he went out to a football field and started catching footballs, literally the day he was drafted. So those players that scream football guys or football players, that's who the Bills love. That's who the Giants guys are going to love now in that front office, that coaching staff. They're going to find a lot of talented players. I have no doubt in my mind.
Ryan, tell me about the flaws of Brian Daboll then. And also the lack of a running game. Do you blame that more on the scheme from Brian Daboll or just the philosophy from Bean to Shane, all the way down, obviously to Daboll of, we got Josh Allen. That's what we're most concerned with.
Well, listen, if you can find me a coordinator that doesn't get criticized, I'd give you $1 million because every coordinator is going to get criticized in game. There were certain times in certain games where people thought that maybe the play calling was a little predictable in certain situations. You go back to that Chiefs game. There was 1 3-and-out that the Bills had when they handed off 3 straight times to Devin Singletary. I picked up a good amount of chunk of yards on first down. I think he picked up about 2 yards in second. So it was a 3rd and 1, 3rd and 2, and then they just didn't get it. And a lot of fans are saying, you have Josh Allen. Why are you not using him? So there's little things like that. But in terms of the run game itself, they really struggled to find their footing for the majority of this season. And part of it had to do with the way that they were using their backs. They were giving limited opportunities to Devin Singletary, Zach Moss, Matt Breida. You're talking about some games where all 3 guys were active, and it would be like 8 carries for Singletary, 8 carries for Moss, maybe 2 or 3 for Breida. You can't get any kind of rhythm when you're working that way. And while Singletary is not a traditional workhorse back, once the Bills started giving him the majority of the reps, you saw him getting about 80 yards per game on the ground, maybe 10, 15 yards receiving. He really came on at the end of the season, came on in the playoffs, had a nice run. And then the other thing, too, was the offensive line. It took them a long part of this season to figure out their best 5. And I think part of that had to do with, this is not on Brian Daboll. I think this almost has to go on Sean McDermott a little bit. Ryan Bates was kind of that missing piece to that offensive line. When he came in, they were all working really well. The guard spot was at left guard. All of a sudden, they could run block on that side. Deion Dawkins went back to looking like a Pro Bowl, all-pro type left tackle. Mitch Morse is the model of consistency. But they didn't want Bates out there, in my opinion, because this was your most versatile offensive lineman. And if someone went down, he could literally plug any hole from tackle to guard, even in a pinch center, where you probably wouldn't want him. That'd probably be the last spot. But he could play across the board. And I think they were just kind of keeping him on the bench in case of injury. And that was the worst thing you could do, because he's one of your best five linemen, and he proved it at the end of the season.
Okay, so then that means Giant fans shouldn't pigeonhole Brian Daboll and they're thinking of, oh, no matter who the quarterback is, he's going to want to throw the ball 75% of the time.
No, absolutely not. Listen, he is going to work with Daniel Jones' best strength, and Jones is an athlete. So I think you're going to see more design runs. You're going to see some more creativity from this offense. They already have some decent weapons in that passing game that he's going to use. I wouldn't be shocked if Isaiah McKenzie came over in free agency. He's a player that has a really close relationship with Brian Daboll, can be used in a variety of ways. Even if you think you have someone that could take that role in terms of the motion, in terms of the jet sweep, it never hurts to have more than enough weapons. And he's a guy that, like I said, the first year he came to Buffalo, he didn't really know anyone. He didn't know if he was going to have a roster spot. Brian Daboll invites him over for barbecue. They just kind of hang out, chill out. Brian Daboll is kind of the master of creating these relationships with these players. He FaceTimes with players all the time, not to talk about football, just to chat, talk players out. Now that he's a head coach, I don't know if he's going to have as much time to do that, but I'm sure he'll still be able to work those relationships out with his players and build a strong bond.
By the way, Dunleavy, before you jump in, I just wanted to ask you, don't you think, isn't it an interesting kind of facsimile between Daniel Jones and Josh Allen? Of course, we know Daniel Jones doesn't have the talent yet that Josh Allen has demonstrated so far as a pro, but they're both kind of similar, aren't they? Daniel
Jones is the extremely poor man's Josh Allen. The broke man's Josh Allen. That's what he is. Yeah, design runs are right up Daniel Jones's alley. That's what he has to do. QB draws, loves them. Run around the edge. QB's pulling, essentially, loves them. Not a super accurate passer, so he needs the threat of defenses think he's going to run to maybe open up some bigger windows. So yes, extremely poor man's version of Josh Allen. Look, it's unfair to expect Daboll to make Daniel Jones into anything resembling Josh Allen, but it's not unfair to expect Daboll to make Daniel Jones into the best version of Daniel Jones, which is closer to what we saw as a rookie with Pat Shurmur, was a pretty good quarterback. What he was the last 2 years with Jason Garrett and Freddie Kitchens was a bad quarterback. So you don't want him to make him into Josh Allen. You want him to make him into the best version of himself. Now, that being said, one of the big topics today was if Daboll is going to call plays. And I think we're operating on this show right now like we're assuming Daboll is going to call plays. And I don't think that that's necessarily true. Shane said he would prefer that Daboll didn't call plays. Daboll said he'll have to see who he gets as his offensive coordinator. If it's somebody he trusts, then he's willing to give it over. If it's somebody he's never worked with before, then he might not be. So my question is, I'm sure it's a story we're both working on, Ryan. What are we thinking with Ken Dorsey? Is he coming to this side of the river, or is he staying? Is he going to Canada with you, or is he coming to Manhattan? What's the deal? I can't even understand for the life of me. You've seen the tweets other reporters have put out there that he was interested in the Giants, and I said this can't be right. Why in the world would Ken Dorsey want to give up a job as an OC for the Bills to come and be the OC for the Giants? You're the OC for Josh Allen. That's a 2-year ticket to head coach. OC for the Giants could be a 2-year ticket to quality control coach. So what are you hearing on Dorsey? Is it a money thing? Does McDermott prefer somebody else to replace Daboll? Why would Dorsey come my way instead of your way?
Yeah, all great questions. And listen, I think part of it is money. I think his agent is doing his due diligence on what can he get from the Giants, what can he get from the Bills, because you said it. In 2 years from now, you could be a head coach, you could be out of the league. So get that money while you can. Just like players, coaches need to kind of have that same attitude. So I think that's the first thing. Second thing is, I was actually talking a little bit about this with Greg before we started taping. If he stays in Buffalo and the Bills take a step backwards next year, that's going to fall on him.
Yep.
Even if it's not the right,
of course,
even if it's not right, it's going to say, well, listen, this was a top 3, top 4 offense the last 2 years. And now with Ken Dorsey, it's not moving forward. And then you start pointing the blame at him, where if you see, Daniel Jones make improvements and he looks like rookie year Daniel Jones, or even takes a step further, and the Giants have success based on where they've been the last few years. And listen, they've been in that 5-6 win range for quite a few years now. If they can get to 7-8 wins in year one, and
have a picture of Dorsey's head on the back page of the Post. Miracle worker.
Exactly. And that's the other thing too. He kind of already has this reputation of being a miracle worker. Cam Newton praised him when he, after he left Carolina and he was going to go into the college ranks a little bit, said, I owe a lot of my success to this guy, my MVP season. He worked with me. He was great. And obviously after Dorsey left, Newton did start to decline as a passer, just a player in general. And then these last 2 years, Ken Dorsey's been working with Josh Allen, and Allen's been at that MVP out of world level right now. So he does have that reputation. I think at the end of the day, Buffalo wants him. There's no doubt in my mind on that, because Josh Allen really praised him last week.
That's why I heard that, and I was like, hey, what are they thinking? Even letting him. Yeah. There has to be a line where McDermott and Bean are like, hey guys, enough's enough. Get your hand out of our cookie jar.
Yeah, and there's also, and both teams have to meet the Rooney requirement and the rule there and interview someone else. So neither team could necessarily move immediately on hiring him. But I think the Bills really want him. They said that Josh Allen's going to have his say in the next offensive coordinator. So as long as the Giants don't blow him away with an offer, my prediction is he ends up in Buffalo. Now, could I be wrong? Absolutely.
The Giants are the ones who sent Joe Schoen in the middle seat on the back row of an airplane next to the bathroom. The Pagulas have a private jet. So I can't imagine they're going to get outbid, but I guess it's possible.
Ryan, what about Giant fans are going to be thinking about any way possible to dissect draft strategy? And well, this particular group hasn't done it yet, so there's no history to look at. But and again, I know that he wasn't the primary decision maker, though he had a lot to say on the players that the Bills drafted. I'm talking, of course, about Schoen over the last several years. So between Dabel and Schoen, what do you think? Do you think that are there any percentages that lead to a certain, because with Gettleman, he likes big guys, so there's always some.
But he never drafted them. That was
that's true. Yeah.
In the world. He loved hog mollies, but all he did was draft and sign skill players. When I look at the Bills, I see a team that built the offensive line. I mean, I think Deion Dawkins was there beforehand, but I see a team that built the offensive line, and then I saw a team this year that said, we have a huge weakness at edge rusher, and they went out and used their first 2 picks on edge rusher. That's a team that cares about the trenches. That's what the Giants need to be. Am I wrong?
No, absolutely not. And, the last 2 years, because they traded the first round pick to get Stephon Diggs 2 years ago, their first pick in that draft then in the second round was AJ Epineza. So they've been really going to try to address the edge rusher. They know that if they can get that guy, that player that can get after the quarterback and take the quarterback down, that defense is going to be even scarier. That's the one thing this team couldn't do the last few years. Now, mind you, I think they knew that these young guys this year weren't going to be able to jump onto the scene and record 8 to 10 sacks. They're hoping down the line that happens with a lot of these younger players you see across the league. But the problem is the veterans didn't step up this year. Jerry Hughes had a lot of pressure, didn't finish plays. Mario Edson had a few more sacks, but he was very inconsistent. F.A. Obata too. But they are very serious about the trenches. They went and they get Spencer Brown this year in the third round. They get Tommy Doyle, who, Doyle, I watched him in training camp. I watched him in the preseason, and I said, man, I don't even know if this guy's going to make the 53-man roster. But at the same time, this guy's a giant. He's highly athletic, and you don't let players like that go, tackle prospects like that go. So they found a way to keep him on the roster. And by the end of the year, they were using him as an extra tight end to get that blocking experience, get him out there. And I think that's going to benefit them. So they definitely go to the trenches. And the other thing I'll say is the Bills look for those freakish athletes that they think that they can develop. You look at Ed Oliver. He's coming off the best season of his career. Now, mind you, that was a first-round pick. So they had to get him there. But you look at Tremaine Edmonds, like another guy that they traded up for in the first round. You look at a Dawson Knox, someone that they believed in enough at the end of a third round to go up and get this guy and say, he has all the traits to be a special player in this league, but he doesn't have the experience. At Ole Miss, he was seldom used as a tight end. He didn't catch a touchdown pass, in fact, at Ole Miss. He comes into the league, though, and he has drop issues, but you saw the flashes. You saw the separation, the athleticism, and it's starting to come together. And the scary thing is he hasn't even scratched the surface on what he can do yet. So they're going to look for those types of players too. It's really good mix there in terms of the talent that they find, even in those late round undrafted free agent gems that they found over the last few years as well.
And were you covering the team in 2017, Ryan?
Yes.
What was here's one thing Giants fans are going to definitely want to know. The Giants salary cap is a disaster. And we talked to Brandon Beane last week when Joe Schoen got hired, and he said their cap wasn't very healthy when those guys got there. What did they do that first year? It seemed like, just looking, on Google and whatnot, seems like their strategy was trade away a lot of guys for draft picks. That seems to be how they got their cap pretty healthy. Was they said, sorry, Sammy Watkins, you're gone. Sorry, I don't know, I can't remember. Ronald Darby. I don't know. Was Mario Addison one of the guys? I don't know. No. Whoever it was. Anyway, there were like 4 or 5 guys that they said between August and October of that year, they traded. Is that how they got the cap healthy, or was there more to it?
A little bit more to it, but you're right. I actually remember that day. I had a headache. I was going to lay down and take a nap, and my phone buzzed twice within about 20 minutes with both of those trades. And I'm like, is this some kind of glitch in their text program? Did someone hack it? Because it says Bills trade Sammy Watkins. And the night before he was showcased. And when you think back at it, okay, well, that's why they traded him. They had him showcased to all these teams, and they took the highest bidder on him. And Ronald Darby was supposed to be their cornerback 1 that season. So it just seemed odd at the time. But in addition to making those moves and acquiring draft capital and a few players, EJ Gaines is one of the players that they ended up getting in one of the trades there. And then Jordan Matthews in the Eagles trade, who didn't pan out. But they tried to find some players that fit what they were doing. But they made the playoffs year 1, Tyrod Taylor and company. And they said, as nice as that is, this is not a Super Bowl team. This is not a Super Bowl roster. And they tore it down. And kudos to them, because a lot of teams would sell their fan base on, well, hey, this is a team that can contend.
That's what the Giants do. They go all in to win 7 or 8 games. That's woo.
Yeah. They backed into the playoffs that year, and they ended up not blowing a lead. They actually played Jacksonville really tight that year. It was a really close game, 1-score game, and they lose. And they say, this isn't the team that we envision. They tore it down after the season, and sooner rather than later, all of a sudden, the cap was pretty healthy again. So I anticipate them trading away some veteran players, especially if it makes sense. And I don't have their roster in front of them.
I know who they are. Yes,
but maybe a player like James Bradbury. What's his situation like?
That is a guy who was going to come to mind. James Bradbury, Blake Martinez, Sterling Shepard. Those are the guys who come to mind who fit that Bills mold.
And when it comes to Bradbury, I wouldn't be shocked if the Bills actually were one of the teams that said, well, hey, why don't we talk about this? He's a former McDermott guy. He played in Carolina. The Bills are probably looking for some veteran depth. Levi Wallace is a free agent. Trey White's.
He's got a huge contract. So you'd have to believe he was still like a number 1 caliber corner. But if you believe that, and he was a Pro Bowler last year, if you believe that, then yeah, he's a guy who could bring you back some value for sure. He would cost a new team $13.4 million.
And that's the other thing too. Once you get him there, you can kind of rework that a little bit. You can work your magic on it. But I wouldn't be shocked, because the Bills, again, Trey White lost for the year. He's anticipated to be back on time for next season, but you just never know. You want to have someone waiting in the wings that knows your system, that you think can come in and play at a high level. And that's just a hypothetical, but I wouldn't be shocked if a player like that, Buffalo even kind of reached out and said, well, let's see if we can make this work.
Before I ask you the last couple of questions I have, I just want to remind everybody out there to check out our new Patreon page at patreon.com/PrimeSN. And for as little as $5 a month, we have a whole bunch of new programming that we've already started as late as last week, and we're going to continue to flood that page with a ton of additional programming. And all you have to do is check it out at patreon.com/PrimeSN. Okay, one more question on the Bills that relating to the Giants, and then a question on the Bills, Ryan. You mentioned McKenzie. Are there any other potential free agents that you could see that could be Giants in 2022?
I mean, he has relationships with players on both sides of the ball, and not knowing the Giants' needs necessarily. I don't want to spit out any specific names, but I'm looking at. I actually have the list in front of me here of free agents that the Bills have. I don't think Trubisky would go to the Giants unless they literally tell him he could compete for the starting job. I think Trubisky's going to have a market.
I think he could compete for the starting job here. I do.
Okay. So that might be a selling point. He has a year in Dabel's system. He looked pretty good in his opportunities. After everything that came out with Matt Nagy at the end of the season, the reports of him kind of like ditching Trubisky at these end of the year, and you don't know how true those things are, but Trubisky kind of came out looking really good after all that. The fact that he had them in the playoffs and all that, you know, he has his limitations too, but I think there's going to be a few teams looking for him for a potential starter next year, but he's a guy that kind of fits. I think Emmanuel Sanders is more likely to retire than anything else. Depending on what he wants to do on special teams, like Taiwan Jones, he's known a few times through. Isaiah McKenzie, like I said, makes a lot of sense. Breida, if you're looking for a body at running back, but they already brought over Antonio Williams, a guy that I really liked a lot in Buffalo. I was hoping to see him get some opportunities this year, but they were oddly very healthy at running back all season long. So, and then Ryan Bates is a restricted free agent. I don't see him going anywhere.
Okay. All right. And then my last question, because we didn't have an opportunity to talk, obviously, over the last couple of weeks since the end of the season. What was the general reaction after losing the game with 17 seconds left?
Yeah, just an absolute disaster. I mean, listen, he hits Gabriel Davis. They go ahead. They get the 2-point conversion. They're up 13 seconds to go. And then it was just kind of a lot of mistakes. You can debate whether or not a squib kick was the right thing to do. I think a lot of fans were expecting a squib kick, but you never know with those kicks. A guy could recover it at the 35
the 40.
and then 40.
You never know.
So that's kind of the dangerous part. But the defense that the Bills played was just absolutely atrocious. They gave 15 yards of space, maybe 10 yards of space. Maybe I'm being exaggerating there, but they gave way too much space to Tyreek Hill on that first play where he had two blockers in front of him. He ends up getting 19 yards. They're almost at midfield at that point. And then they're playing the sidelines like the Chiefs have no timeouts remaining. They still had 2 at that point. So you pretty much give a free release to Travis Kelce and you let him get those yards. And I get it was a 48-yard field goal to tie it, which is no sure thing, but Butker's pretty accurate in that regard. And then obviously overtime, we know how that went. So there's a little bit of heat on Leslie Frazier in the defense and Sean McDermott, because listen, he's a defensive mind too. And all we heard was the execution wasn't there. And I don't know how you can put that on the players with the way you had them playing back. There were strategies they could have used. It. Listen, first down, I'm telling one of my cornerbacks, you get right up on Tyreek Hill and you tackle him. You take the 5-yard defensive holding penalty and the time comes off the clock for whatever was, even if Mahomes spikes it into the ground because he sees that's your strategy, sure. 2 or 3 seconds come off the clock there and it's only 5 yards.
Great point.
Little things like that they weren't using heads-up football. So definitely frustrating, especially after Josh Allen played his heart out on the road. Just what a game, though, back and forth by both quarterbacks.
It actually has to be worse today, not to rub salt in your wound, but or a fan's wound, rather. But it actually has to be worse today when you see that, okay, Kansas City didn't even win the game. So, I mean, you got to feel like, oh, my God, if we won the game, we'd certainly be going to the – so we wouldn't have let down like Kansas City let down. I mean, that's actually got to be worse. At least if Buffalo Bills fans saw Kansas City in the Super Bowl, they'd say, you know what, they're just as good as us. It's a coin flip. But to see the Bengals in the Super Bowl has to just be a killer.
Yeah, I think a lot of fans thought that if they had faced off, especially at Highmark Stadium, the Bills would have won that game. But kudos to the Bengals for the way they fought back. The brilliant defensive strategy in the second half. They were pretty much only rushing 3, playing 8 into coverage, and really frustrating Mahomes because the coverage was there. And then finally someone would get home and sack him. And once he was sacked once or twice, he did seem a little rattled. He was a little errant with his passes from that point on. And that's one thing the Bills couldn't do. They couldn't really take him down in that game, and we never saw him rattled whatsoever.
All right, Ryan. So now I know you talked a lot after the game, and all of those shows are still available, of course, and that is on the Upstate YouTube page. What is the address there?
Yeah, you can find our stuff. It's called the Shout Buffalo Football Podcast. If you just search Buffalo Bills on NY Up on YouTube, you'll find that. If you don't want to watch it on there and you want to download it, all of your favorite podcast platforms will have it as well.
Ryan, I appreciate it again, and we'll talk to you sometime in the next month or so as we get ready between the combination of free agency and the draft, because that's always a fun time of year for the fans.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ryan. All right, Ryan Talbot, and I'm going to let you go as well, Ryan. I know you're real busy. You had the press conference early this morning. So general consensus so far with the fans. I mean, if I'm a Giant fan, I'm pretty stoked right now. I like the combination of Dabel, a New Yorker.
Giants are the king of the offseason, Greg.
But the fans, are you getting that yet? That the fans are kind of happy about this?
Yeah, they're happy about it, but they were happy about Joe Judge. You couldn't do a better press conference than Joe Judge.
You're right.
Did. So,
right.
Yeah, I mean, they're happy about it, but at the same time, they're tired of being happy in the offseason. They're at the show me results stage. And Brian Daboll, like Joe Judge, inherited 4 years of crap before him. Now, Brian Daboll has to inherit 6 years on top of him. So.
And what are you working on? That'll be available on NewYorkPost.com.
Everything Brian Daboll. Everything Brian Daboll, everything Joe Schoen. I'm not going down to the Senior Bowl. I'm just diving into the new era of the Giants.
All right. Well, we'll talk again sometime soon for sure. Well, we'll probably talk again next week when we preview the Super Bowl with Mark Lawrence. So, Ryan, appreciate it. We'll talk to you again next time.
Sounds good. Thanks, Greg.